I'm not going to ask them until there's a space for that. And I'd also like to say if any of the speakers have questions for each other, I'm sure we'd be very interested to hear that as well.
Well, I'm just kind of wondering, I guess, the necessity for finding a definition of animated documentary. I'm sure there's been debate where someone says, this is an animated documentary, and someone else says, no, that's not an animated documentary. And I don't know, I don't feel like I quite understand where people come down, generally speaking, you know, where the dividing line is, as somebody else said. Like, I realize it's sort of permeable, but I wonder if there's anything in anybody's experience that you find happens a lot in terms of there's some school of thought that says this is the dividing line.
And this is a question I think all of us could answer, but I think why don't we start with someone who actually works a lot in these divisions.
Yes,
yeah.
I do like divisions. Well, really, for me, it's not. There's two ways to look at the question. One is spectators may be unsure whether something is or is not an animated documentary, or this documentary. They could be unsure whether a live action film is a documentary. So I don't think we're ever going to be able to find some kind of classification that will allow people to just say, aha, that goes in that box and that goes in that box. However, of course, something being, us being unsure what something is doesn't make it not the thing that it is. So, you know, this is what was at the core of my paper, is that a documentary, regardless of how it's produced, is a documentary completely in virtue of what it refers to, in the world that it refers to. So even if we don't know what that reference is, for whatever reason, it still is whatever it is. It's either a documentary, animated, whatever, or it isn't. So it's categorically straightforward, but as usual, in practice, it's very muddy.
Can I just add something to that? I think there's something very important going on here. This is the first conference about animated documentary. Some people are only aware of it now in the last year or so. It's an area that's being worked on actually in festivals, let's say at a research area, not so much published since about 20 years. So animated documentary and the concepts around it, I'm glad you're nodding, have been around a long time. So I just want to bring that up because it's something I think is really relevant for people who are new to it here, and to recognize a lot of the amazing work that's gone on before that hasn't really made it into publication. And if I can make just a little plug, we're doing a journal. We've got an issue in, in print now, on animated documentary, curated by Jeffrey Scholar, who's an experimental documentary filmmaker. And I think the issue that comes out of this conference is if the edited version will be a major contribution to it, so submit your stuff. That was just an aside. So I'll take it. I have another question up there, and then David.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think, yeah, Ruth. I think behind Ruth as well, that's a question. No, it was Ruth.
So I was sort of intrigued by the fact that you're including Ryan Larkin's film Walking as an example of a poetic mode of documentary, because I hadn't thought of it that way before. But when I think about it from the point of view of the fine arts and the idea of observational drawing, that makes more sense to me. And that led me to wonder about not strictly adhering to the ideas that come out of filmmaking about documentary practice, but also looking into the fine arts and the approaches to creating visual art that are rooted in observation of the real world, questioning social paradigms and practices in the world, etc. And it made me think of a brief essay by John Berger that came out maybe 20 years ago. It's called To Take Pencil and to Draw, and it was in Harper's Magazine. I have it somewhere, where he identifies 3 or 4 different modes of drawing and talks about a mode that studies, which is more like Ryan's film Walking, where he's really watching a lot of walkers and representing that, and then pictures by Goya, where he's remembering things that he saw, and it's sort of a social protest, and then other kinds of studies. Anyways, it's kind of an interesting essay. And so I just wonder if there's a way to start validating animation's roots in the visual arts as well as in film and cinema by starting to develop a taxonomy that includes these different ways of operating as a visual artist in addition to a filmmaker.
Yes, yes, I believe you're right. It would be very fruitful to do so, and I don't know that text, but I certainly would like to read it. And but from my impression of this film, it's more on the side of a poetic approach than really in a way that a direct cinema would film people walking, and because he wants to stress also more the aesthetic elements, and he deforms elements. That's something that in an observation mode you wouldn't do, and that's and there I believe it's always a matter of degree, but I believe it's more on the side of the changing a little bit what you see, taking elements out of it, stressing them, while observing, like in direct cinema, it's lets the camera roll and we see what's happening in front of the lens in the most explicit example.
Great. I have a question for Jennifer Jane, and it's one of the things you bring up in the this discussion about the semiopragmatics is the idea of the viewer being that there's a dependence on cultural constraint. This idea of a cultural constraint of the viewer, and it's kind of two questions. One would be if let's say the viewers don't have that cultural knowledge, experience of the location of, I'm assuming, Brazil, South America, the language, the contexts that are so beautifully documented. We're using that word very carefully now. And because they use what is quite well known is the Aardman puppet style. Aardman animation that uses these kind of, the puppets look very, very imitative of the Aardman style. Do you think that makes a difference for people who don't have the cultural context of the Brazilian world to help us into that? Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I think so, because for Brazilian people, you can recognize the people shown in the film as a real people. You know that these people, and you see this, or maybe you can think, is it true that they interviewed that people? But then when they end of the film, when you see the credits, you confirm that it's exactly what I thought. It's these people. But for foreigners, don't know. Like you, what makes the difference is that I said to you that it was real people. So you believe me. So you take it for real. It's what happened in the same pragmatic approach is when you have the information about the film that it was based in a true story or it was real documentary. We see it as a documentary. So it's not in the film, but it's outside of this.
That seems to have a lot to do with what Paul's talking about, but there's a few more questions, so I see in the back.
I'll just briefly go back to the point about drawing and so-called observational documentary drawing. It's interesting because it brings us back to the Enlightenment tradition as well, where you might sort of draw a documentary tradition back to, when I'm thinking of the drawings and Hodges and Collages and things, a lot of people, Bernard Smith, the site says it's an early case of documentary drawing, which takes place in a plenary context, which is usually done on site, et cetera, for live subjects. What it makes me think of is how we begin to think of documentary film in a comparative context, comparing it to other media. seems to me what happens when you start talking about documentary animation is you're in a way impelled to leap out of the discourse of documentary film, which has been so kind of carefully honed since the 1930s and through the various critics that you've been mentioning, activity, vehicles, et cetera, et cetera. So I was just wondering, particularly as Paul Sellers was mentioning, like I don't know if you're doing this intentionally, you're talking about a factual film, probably more than you were talking about the documentary in terms of what we were talking about. I'm just wondering if all of you, in a sense, might say something a little bit about those distinctions and about how your work, again, as well, as in a very comparative context of your designated documentary, a little bit more about that.
So you're asking a question between whether there is a distinction, or if they'd like to say something about the distinction between the factual and the documentary? Is that your question?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
And
just wanted to frame it.
media.
Sure. Paul? I think he's
Sure.
addressed
Okay.
it, yeah.
It's in fact probably on page about 10 of my 7-page paper. Part of the 5,000 words that got cut out. Had a whole section in there about Noel Carroll's arguments around the term and whatever that term is going to be, documentary. The problem is that is solely rooted in the type of film that Paul Rotha was involved in making, and so it has a clear meaning there. We can go to non-factual, but as soon as we start looking at films like Stan Brackage's Mothlight, it's purely non-fictional. It's purely non-fictional, but we'd hardly call it a documentary or anything like that. And we can get it. He doesn't talk about factual and non-fiction. Sorry, let's talk about non-fiction. He doesn't talk about factual. The problem with factual is that there's just so many instances where it may be factual. For instance, CCTV camera footage is purely factual, but it doesn't actually convey anything that we would expect in a documentary. And so we can start to run around these terms and get really confused. The problem, I think, Noel Carroll argues that instead we're going to call it a film of presumptive assertion. Incredibly precise and linguistically rather clumsy. And I don't think it's a winner. It's not going to catch on. But of course, what he's trying to do is trying to use a name as a description. And proper names don't necessarily function as descriptions. And so John Searle actually talks about the notion of the degenerate proper name. And to me, that seems to be a much better way to look at it. We're gonna struggle with any term that we try and raise. And instead, we generally know what we're going to talk about. We can look for likely descriptions, but when we need a term, we can use a term that has some descriptive capacity, but which we don't have to rely upon its descriptive capacity in order to talk about what it is, or refer to what it is we're talking about. So when it comes to talking about factual documentary non-fiction, I'm not so sure that the term itself and some kind of distinction between them is that important. For me, the most important thing is that we're talking about things that occur in this world, or something that has as I said, the fictive invention behind it. And for me, that's really the only important distinction.
Anybody else like to address that? It's addressed to
Yes.
everyone. If you'd like to.
Yeah, of
Otherwise,
course.
we'll deal with the question.
For me, an interesting perspective is offered by Marie-Laure Ryan. She has two models, the analog and the digital, to talk about fact and fiction. On the one hand, if you use an analog model, there's a continuum running from one side fiction to the other side fact, and then you could pinpoint every work on that continuum. But it doesn't work for every work. For some, it's okay, but not for all others. On the other hand, you have the digital model, where you can analyze works where some parts are and others are fictional. But it works also for a part of the films or the comics or whatever, books. So it's a mixture of those two that can help us to deal with those intricate, complex relations that can exist in a work between fact and fiction.
Great. Questions? Yeah, David?
it's only really an observation in a sense, going back historically in film history, the notion that there was a thing called actuality, which then in the 20s suddenly became the poetic representation of reality.
Yeah.
And we've got all of those words in what you're talking about today,
Photogeny.
actual, real representation and so on. And that debate was there in live action movies. And now I'm glad to see it's moving into the animation. So it's really an observation rather than a question. Thank you.
Yep.
I'd just like to add to the questions because came from what
How about drawing?
about the documentary. What does there's so much going on in the documentary and what I've noticed is that when a documentary filmmaker tried to do an animated documentary, it turns out different than when animators do an animated documentary. The reasons are different. And what is being considered an animated documentary is different as well. Documentary filmmaker often consider films with little animation animated documentary because for them it is a huge leap to use something that's not live action material in their film and to get out of their normal conventions. And so when we try to find definitions and when we try to talk about what's documentary, what's non-fiction, what's animation, what's animated documentary, we also have to see who's producing these films, where does it come from, and what kind of films are we talking about? Because now we only talk about films that are purely animated, but there's a lot of films that are a mix of different media, even the cross-genre. I mean, there's more than just animated documentary. There's animated fiction documentary, and so there's a lot of things going on that is really hard to grasp, and it's even harder to put into definition. So that's why the discussion is going on for so many years, and no one comes down with that definition.
I should just let you know that's Annegret Richtner. There's a festival in Leipzig that is animated documentary. It's been running. It was started originally by Otto Alder, who has a website, or his email name is Animadoc. He's been working this for 20 or 25 years, and Annegret's now part of that festival. You'll be talking about this, I think, in one of the panels. Yeah. Tomorrow morning. Yeah. I'd like to just throw something out because I'm burning to say it, and it's kind of a question, but I'm not quite sure. And then we've got another question there, and I think we'll probably hold it for there. I get a sense from Paul, and I'm looking forward to reading the other 15 pages of that. But I think it relates to what's going on in this panel, all what we're trying to kind of tease out here is, I think you're doing something, I'm going to be very careful with what I say because I think it's really important. And it sounds like what you're doing is making a case for the primacy of ideation over the index. Ideation is, Freud, Locke, goes all the way back. The mental work, the mental effort, capacity to imagine a concept. It becomes concrete in your mind. So that's ideation. It's in the work that we do when we're watching animation, whether it's documentary or not. So I see you're nodding, so I want to have a conversation with you about that. But what I'd like to say is I think there's something very important going on in the work that Paul's doing to get us away from this idea of the index, which is something some of us have been trying to push in film studies. They're in crisis because of they're losing their index. So there's lots of opportunities for animation film scholars in film studies. That was a bit too long of a comment. We've got a question up here and then
it's
another.
not really a question, it's just an observation. As I'm talking as I suppose, an animated documentary filmmaker. And I think it's really defining what is documentary. I think it's really almost up to the viewer. It's like in the eye of the beholder, because I mean I made a conscious decision at a certain point to just say I'm a documentary animator because it became convenient to say that. It's kind of quite useful to put yourself into a category, and then people want to write about your work a bit more.
You're Jonathan, right? Jonathan Hodgson is a filmmaker, animated
I'm talking this
documentarist.
afternoon.
And he's sitting beside another animated documentarist, Sylvie Ingas.
But I was just going to say that every film I've made really is an animated documentary, but I only realised about 20 years later that
we need us to figure it out. Yeah, to tell you what
so
you're
it
doing.
became convenient and to kind of put that label on them sometimes. But you could look at them another way and say they're, I mean, in a way they're drama as well. They're observations of life, that's all really.
That's, I think, the point that was trying to be made here by all papers was, what's the distinction? Can we be that distinctive? Can we be that definitive and prescriptive? So I feel like we're moving a bit more into conversation here. I'm aware of the time. You're all still here. There's lunch, and thank you for sitting in longer. And thank you, please.
Okay, I will talk about animated documentaries' potential to deconstruct stereotypes of mental and physical disease. In my paper, I would like to forward the parameters of animated documentary storytelling, which have the potential to invent a new perspective on people with mental or physical disorder. There is no doubt that our preconceptions of disability are socialized. The main goal of animated documentaries is the establishment of a discussion on disabilities. Till today, the definition on documentaries on disability is held by the media and medical discourse. It is also this definition that determines our gaze on disabled people. Remember Disney's Dumbo, the flying elephant, and the Beauty and the Beast, or the Hunchback of Notre Dame. All of these protagonists in the named films are suffering a life exclosed from social life. The metaphor of the evil in Disney films is the disabled body. Magic sets the standards on what is normal. The disabled do not have rights to exist in Disney films. That is why the body and mind of the disabled person changes magically into a beautiful appearance. This paper will demonstrate that animated documentaries offer a significant possibility to overcome the stereotypes that are associated with disability. Animation allows a positive alienation of the disabled person and enables the inner self to be brought into the open. Animated documentaries play with the socialized gaze of the audience. No one is free from stereotypical interactions, but everyone is in the position to overcome his or her own failures and to invent new strategies of interpersonal contacts, which are based on reflection, tolerance, and interest into the other person's mind. Animated documentaries must be understood as a creative treatment of actuality, and therefore as documentaries. Here you see a quote out of Paul Well's book, which I think is really attractive to my way of discussing animated documentaries. For me, animated documentaries are more than interview-based animation films. Animated documentaries have the potential to deconstruct the well-established media and medical discourse practice on disability. They have this power because of their unconventional audiovisual strategy to confront the audience with the topic in a way. They offer a multi-perspective view on the topic and call for a new quality of self-reflection. Central to my paper is Neil's theory of empathy on film fiction and Nichols' interactive mode of documentary, as well as Plantinga's essay Moving Picture and the discussion on non-fiction film. Also, I'd like to refer to Paul Ward's The Margins of Reality, especially the chapter Animation and Documentary Representation, as well as to Vaughan's theory of spectators' response, and to Paul Well's essay Animated Interactions, Animation, Aesthetics, and the World of the Interactive Documentary. Again, it must be stated that this paper refers to animated documentaries which deal with the topic of mental or physical disease. I would like to preemptively refuse the idea that this paper intends to establish generalizations about the field of animated documentaries. My thesis is as follows. Animated documentaries have a potential to deconstruct stereotypes that are associated with disabled people. In these presentations, stereotypes are defined as social constructs. In contrast to documentaries, animated documentary productions affect an empathical way of film perception. The audience not only feels for, but feels with the protagonist. Throughout the sequences when spectators and protagonists share the same experiences, because the audience is set into the position of the protagonist, an awareness for the person behind the disability is built up. This is a quote from Paul Wells, what I'm now reading. The interaction that is taking place is between the multiple originals, the real person, the taped interview, the animated version of the person, and further. During the screening, the audience permanently knows that what they see is a depiction of someone who exists in the real world. Paul Wells sees, referring on Vaughan in such interactive documentaries, the power that the audience re-evaluates their understanding. That's the typical spectator's responding of the real, because throughout these multiplications, the stereotype is somehow sliding into handy pieces. In my research, I was searching for common formal structures in animated documentary storytelling which instigate a turning point in the way a widespread audience experiences disability. Through these analyses of a representative set of animated documentaries that deal with the topic of physical and mental disability, I established certain parameters in my master thesis. Overall, these parameters could be described as a strategy that is able to deconstruct stereotypes and has the potential to investigate, to build up a radical new view on the topic. Now I'd like to present the parameters which are central to my paper. At the same time, I would like to present Shira Afni's Tying Your Own Shoes, Bob Sebastian's Snag and Shrink, and Tim Webb's Asfortism, as well as Sound Shadows of Julie Angus. This is because I like to demonstrate the practicability of the parameters on a set of films. When focusing on the individual emotional aspects of the topic, the visual style turns into abstraction. For that time, the audience is in the position to feel with the protagonist and to explore her way of experiencing. That is why I'm discussing these parameters as change of visual styles, change between abstraction and concretization. The return to discourse, to concretization, to facts and stereotypes, which are well established in people's minds, is represented by visuals which are optically related to everyday perception. The return to discourse can be established by live action or in animation aesthetic. The same strategy can be used for the demonstration of a change of perspectives. In animated documentary, there is the tendency for a genuine individual visual style when the protagonist is talking about him herself. The turn to live action or to a specific animation style arises when the protagonist is presented from the filmmaker's view or by others. And here you see a couple of representation of the protagonist of Snag and Shrink, and it's related to his inner self. When he's really excited, the representation changes. It's really colorful, really blurred. Then you see some really concrete pictures when he is really inner self and really happy with the situation where he is in. Bob Sebastian's film is on autism, and that maybe explains why it's hard to get why this guy is totally changing within a bunch of images. Oh, well, I have to go that way. Use of metaphors and deconstructing stereotypes in a performative way. I'm referring on Shira Afni's film here. There's also a tendency within animated documentary productions to use objects, gestures, sounds as metaphors. These must be understood as signals for stereotype point of views, but it's because of their iterative character and their dynamic modification that these metaphors gain within a performative act. It's referring on Judith Butler in innovative sense on the topic. For example, you see here, there is this, it's in Tying Your Own Shoes, it's right in the title. It's referring on Down syndrome. Or to be regular, to be independent. These are all topics. These are highly stereotyped, and normally you don't think that disabled persons have the potential to be independent, to be reflected on themselves. And that's when you put these pictures in this film, it's contextualizing that it's different, that it's not true what we are believing by watching at these people with these stereotype gaze. And here you see another representation. It's birds for these disabled person. They can fly, they can change their places, they're really independent, they're really free. And that's totally different to our everyday perception of disabled person. And in Deconstruct, it's this floating environment, which must be understood as metaphor. Or in Sound Shadows of Julie Angers, it's a blind person, which is portrayed, and you always see sound shadows. And that's what she is experiencing while going through her worlds. Then self-portrait and self-portrait praxis. Animated documentaries also demonstrate their potential to deconstruct stereotypes through their self-portrait and self-portrait practice. Best practice example would be Chris Landred and Ryan. It is never only the main protagonist who is portrayed in an animated documentary. The interesting point is that filmmaker and protagonist on the one hand, and audience and interaction with filmmaker and protagonist on the other hand, engage on her part in developing new communication strategies. The self-portrait and self-portrait praxis stands for the opportunity and the general need to dismiss simple generalizations. Within the animation process and even before in the interview between protagonist and filmmaker, both share their stereotypical expectations on the life of the other one. During production, the filmmaker frees his mind from these repressed ways of interaction with disabled person. The animated documentaries make us aware that people with special needs must be seen and addressed as individuals and not as type of person. And here you see how funny it is and how playful it is to work together in a collaborative project with disabled people. And you see their self-representations, and here you see that these pictures is this metaphor thing when Shira Afni is representing this disabled person in her film. And on the other hand, you have the live action where you see the disabled person in herself, in their body. And I think you wouldn't like to trust this person that much easier when you only have this picture, only this live action. It's much better when it's blurred with this animation, because then you can feel in an empathic way with these special needs. The pyramidal language, respectively, the change from word-based language to visual language sound is fundamental for animated documentary productions. In animated documentary practice, those disabled persons who have problems to find words for their feelings create their own visual-based communication tools. Only by accepting these individual communication strategy, by emphasizing with the protagonist, the audience gets an authentic insight in the life of a special need. During the screening, the disabled person and the spectator change their position. The audience is confronted with a situation in which all socialized communication tools somehow change their meaning, function, and seem to be useless. In an animated documentary screening, the audience is asked to reflect on the high quality of participation. An individual communication strategy is developed in interaction with others. The animated documentary functions like a mirror for the audience. The missing link to the daily life perception of the disabled person is uncovered because we don't know how to interpret the conversation style while having a first contact with disabled persons. Making the invisible visible. Last idea is to address the tragedy of making the visible invisible. Of making the invisible visible, sorry. This aspect is quite related to the parameters presented before. I think that almost all assumptions in context with disabled people are far away from their daily perception. This has to do with our missing link to people's mind in general. Even the disabled people are not necessarily unhealthy. There is a predominant gap between our thoughts and feelings and the beliefs of people around us. In our daily communications, we often refer to established stereotypes. I think that this gap between significant and signified is in point of a disabled person's distinctive. By making the invisible visible, a new contact point for communication is built up. This is now no longer the surface, the body of the disabled person which is addressed. The audience internalizes that there is an individual mind talking, which was for a long time covered of the disability discourse. And you see nice quote out of Tim Webb's AS4 Autism, where the protagonist is explaining why she don't like to be touched from their mother, because she has the feeling that she's eating her while being touched. And I think you can't understand that without these animations, which can give you an impact on what this feeling must be all about. After watching the animated documentaries of Julie Angus and Shira Afni and all the others I have seen, and I think as well when the audience would see them, the audience cannot discuss and focus disabilities in the same way as before. The animated character is based on persons, but represented by a visual expression of their perception to the audience. This builds up a form of self-disclosure which is pure. This tragedy of self-disclosure plays with discourse, and because of that, the lordliness of the discourse is no longer given. The animated documentary offers us an emotional perspective on a slice of life topic, which is based on the information the person concerned is giving us. There is no doubt that the animated character must be an abstraction of the person we listen to on the soundtrack. The greatest potential that resides within the format of animated documentaries is its ability to bring a dispersed audience in contact and interaction with a well-established topic in a creative way. This is done by presenting a subjective, individualized voice. This so-called phenomena of psychorealism, which is inherent in animated documentaries, offers those people who have trouble representing themselves as individuals because they live with a disability a new communication tool. With the help of a performative tragedy, which is a pendant to animated documentaries, the protagonists try to deconstruct stereotypes and build up a distance between body and mind. It is a fact that the bodies of people with mental or physical disorder function as contact points of culturally developed stereotypes. In contact with disabled people, there's often drawn a continuity between body and mind, which is unsustainable. With the help of the former strategies of animated documentaries, the protagonists free their body of collective inscriptions and gain possibility to their bodies as part of their individuality. Thank you.
From the Aalto University, and I'm probably the only person in Finland who's interested in documentaries and animation combined. So because of that, I wanted to interview some directors, because I found 3 films in Finland which combine documentary and animation. So I wanted to find out why these women were very interested in doing this. So as background information, the Finnish documentary films by women have in recent years introduced new shifts from traditional documentary filmmaking into more poetic and experimental forms by adding animated or fictive elements, especially when expressing feelings and femininity. And my case study for this conference investigates 3 different films from Finnish female filmmakers, and they are the ones who combine animation and documentary material. And I will find out how femininity and female emotions are expressed through these modern filmmaking methods, and why these directors want to combine animation with documentary. And the 3 cases are Learned by Heart, The Little Snow Animal, and Monster Birthday. And I present these 3 cases with synopsis, clips, and interviews of the film's directors. So the first case is Learned by Heart. It's been directed by Marjo Trimminen, who is a famous animator in Finland, and she teaches in London. And Päivi Takala, who is from a musical side. She's a musician and a sound designer, and she teaches at the Aalto University. So this film consists of 5 episodes which cover the legacies of Finland's post-war period, and it's depicted from a child's point of view and how child experienced those years. And I can first show you a clip. Very long clips, otherwise we don't have time. Okay, so the synopsis goes like this. Finland emerged from the Second World War in schizophrenic state. The nation had survived 2 wars against the Soviet Union with her independence intact, but had officially come out on the losing side, and it was hard to talk about the war in the home. And fathers were back from the front, but they found it difficult to adjust to everyday life. And the heroism and camaraderie of the battlefield lived on their memories. The horrors of war haunted their dreams. And mothers, the heroines of the household, took control and began organizing the lives of their families. And to post-war children, their parents seemed distant, authoritarian, frightening. And it took the 60s to free society from the spectre of unquestionable authority and to open windows to the outside world. And television brought war back into the living room, but now it was being fought on the other side of the planet. And this treatment, the film is composed of 5 different episodes, and they all contain Lutheran hymns, and these motifs dominate the soundtrack and recall memories of a time when they were an intimate element in everyday life. And here you can see Marit Rimminen's websites, if you're interested. And so first I asked where did they get the idea, and from the themes, ideas and feelings, and they didn't set out to do a documentary film. And they wanted to find the perfect way to expression and work together, because they were 2 different kinds of specialists, and their own expertise gave form to the film. And this film became a documentary, even if the other maker is really an animation filmmaker, because of the real and subjective expressions of that time and themes. And why did they use it? And for Rimminen, it's a given to use animation, and the animation opens up different ways of film expression with more freedom and air than normal documentary. And documentary as a genre opened up to them when they defined this film for the film festival sign-up. So it was then when they decided it was a documentary. And why did they use animation in a documentary film? And Rimminen would ask, why was documentary combined with animation film? And the theme of this film came from old family album photographs and from old hymns. And this combination that they drew from when starting to develop the theme of the post-war childhood. So these authentic photographs fascinated them, and they wanted to make them alive and reveal their secrets, and also show the time, the spirit of the time. And so what can animation show or depict better than a documentary film? And they feel that animation enables free movement in space and time, and as a consequence it enables the treatment and manipulation of different states of minds, memories and feelings. And especially in this film, it enabled the depiction of subjective feelings, which in the director's heads were in contact with the world of the hymns. And because memory is selective and subjective, like animation, where the most unessential is left out and the focus is on the essential. Recollections and the past take shape through the feelings and understandings, and drawing and picture manipulation, which they use, makes these photos abstract and gives space to feelings and perception. So why did they end up using this style? It was because the theme and experiments with techniques gave the direction. And the sound design the sound is very traditional and realistic. It was derived from the filmic needs, and the purpose was to unify the pictures, shaded by different materials, collage materials, and they didn't set out to stylize the soundscape very much. But they found with sound design they could combine different elements and also unify the entirety. and this is how they could combine real footage with archival materials, photographs and animation. So I'll show you one more before this. So Takala says that a child has been given out to the world, a very good child, and Rimminen was also very fascinated with the success of her continuity challenge of the girl character, which is shown in various ways, sometimes as a photograph, live footage, animation or drawing, or even a doll. And they both feel that the story follows one girl and at the same time all the girls. And this has been made through by the use of various elements when combining documentary and animation. So the second film is a student film made by the students at the Aalto University, and it's been directed by Mia Tervo, and it's called Little Snow Animal. And this is a film about a teenage girl in anguish and about desperately wanting to be loved. And she phones to a radio program, Yölinja, Nightline, where the voice of Pekka Sauri answers, and he's there for her. And this film is a tribute to this program. And it combines animation and archive material with documentary. And synopsis, it's not wrong to want love, you just need to look for it in the right place. And I'll show you the first clip. So the idea came from Tervo when she had been seeing girls showing off themselves for everyone in various kinds of photographs in social media. And at the same time, she'd read about an abusive situation. And after that, she also had a personal experience that some man persuaded a 13-year-old daughter of someone she knew to run away from home. And then later she was found and sent into mental hospital. And these events and her own experiences of abuse led her to make this film. So she can show with animation things that she otherwise cannot or doesn't know how to, and animation can also depict feelings better than plain documentary, according to her. And she asked the animator to create something as simple as possible, and the animator then drew these graphic images for her, and she was happy with the result. And according to her, collaboration between director and animator is hard to describe because it was born by exchanging different ideas and opinions, and suddenly there was just something there. So then I will show you the second clip. So what does the director think of the entity in retrospect? And it was very hard to edit this film. In a way, she's not even now satisfied with it because it could have been more seamless. But on the other hand, she's happy that it got finally made and it's been given good feedback in Finnish film festivals. It has won, for example, at the Tampere Short Film Festival. And she thinks that it works quite well and it touches her even now. And so the third case is Monster Birthday, directed by Marika Väisänen. And synopsis. Mimi is a 6-year-old preschooler who has tons of hobbies and a vivid imagination. Despite being lively and cheerful, she has had trouble making friends with children her age and is afraid of being bullied. And Mimi is about to turn 7 and decides to invite friends to her birthday party for the first time. And will the party help Mimi conquer her fear? And this film combines fictive scenes made with blue screen technique, traditional drawing and object animation. And I'll show you the first clip. So the idea for making this documentary, which includes animation, came to Väisänen because for the first time she combined animation material to documentary film when she made her first professional production, Home Away from Home. And when she started to make this film, using the same method felt already natural. And the most important reason to combine animation was that Väisänen felt it was the best way to tell about the inner world of a child and the experiences of her. And this would be otherwise very difficult, if not impossible, to be captured on film. And during the process of making this film, Väisänen found out that the main character expresses her feelings by drawings. And then it felt very natural for her to use Mimi's animations as part of this documentary. So why did she end up using this particular style? And she wanted to present a child's inner world with its joys, sorrows, and fears. And it's difficult to tell with the traditional documentary filmmaking methods about fears or feelings inside one's head. So she decided to choose the way of the animation film, and it suited really well this film because it's directed straight at children. So with the help of these animation techniques, Väisänen could tell a complicated subject matter in a way that the target audience would understand it and not feel too uneasy about it. So she set as her aim that children are within the filmmaking process themselves. And also in this film, Väisänen wanted to show the handwriting of film's main character, Mimmi, and bring elements of documentary into the animation through this. And the blue screen animations in which the main character is acting supports the documentary aspect of this animation. So with the animation, she could present the stories in a wider way, and the same applies to the interview material, which she had a lot. And now I'll show you another clip. So she thinks that combining animations and documentary worked well, and she obtained what she wanted with it and is happy about the result. And actually all the directors who I interviewed, they told that they probably will be using animations with documentary in the future as well. So my question was, how are female emotions and femininity expressed through these modern filmmaking methods? And my answer to this during the recent years in Finland is that women are depicting memories, ideas, feelings, and hopes, and in this case of children or a teenager. And through various animation techniques, it doesn't limit the forms of expression because everything is accepted in a combination with fictive and documentary elements. So there are blue screen fictive elements, drawings, and picture manipulation. And the forms of representing femininity in these cases expand into new horizons, given this new range of tools in the context of combining animation with documentary material. Ways of expressing what is inside our heads, the subjective world and experiences have been renewed as these cases manifest. And instead of animation functioning as an alienation technique, it's through the use of animation that the viewer attaches oneself to these main characters and learns to comprehend them. And based on these cases, it seems to me now that mixing animation to documentary material expresses the subjective world in a wider way than just sticking with the traditional documentary methods. And since women tend to depict feelings and emotions, at least in Finland, it's especially those people who have adopted the method of mixing animation to documentary. And my personal interest in conducting this case study lies in the possibility of combining documentary material with animations in different platforms and with the use of new technology. And this artistic research, which we do at the Aalto University, has given me ideas and has legitimized how and why I could combine animations in the future to my personal documentary productions in different platforms, because nowadays other documentarists don't want to use animation together with the documentary, especially, except these cases. So, thank you.